Hello.
Hello. So we're live. Same three people. Fantastic to have both of you here. Tayo, who's a Christian, Claire, who's agnostic, but wants the world to follow the Quran, which is a religious guidebook for Muslims and all of humanity, for anybody who wants to follow. I'm a Muslim. What do I do in my shows? I like to say these are not really academic discussions. These are discussions to change your life, that you can be happy. And one thing I want to add in, that I've started adding in a lot more now, happiness is actually really easy, but we make it complicated because we're so confused, because we're not listening to God, who makes it easy for us. So that's my introduction. So right now we're talking about, this live stream is about homelessness. Is it a failure of, I'm going to say, leadership and or morality? I'll quickly, as part of the introduction, explain what has this got to do with happiness. From an Islamic point of view, Prophet Muhammad says that society stands on the lowest realms, or I can't remember the exact phrase, but society stands on the weakest people. So we realize that, especially in what's it called, the when COVID was around, we haven't used that word for so long. What's the word when COVID was spreading everywhere? The epidemic, not epidemic, even bigger than that, pandemic. That's the one. We haven't used that for a while. So when we had the pandemic, we were always clapping, especially in England, clapping for heroes, and the heroes were the dustbin men, the nurses, and all the people who did the most basic work. But without them, society would have collapsed. Without dustbin men, we would have had rats everywhere and disease and stuff like that. Nothing would have worked. So in that sense, I think one reason why we need to care about the homeless and the poor especially is that society depends on them. And if they all become homeless and sick and whatever, then us richer people, relatively, would have a lot of problems. We wouldn't have our relatively comfortable lives, because society has its foundations, and a lot of the poor people are that foundation. That's my quick introduction. Why do you think? And I suppose I should add, like, maybe the reason for this question is that homelessness is increasing, especially in the West. And shockingly, in some of the richest places in the world, like California, which seems to have the highest level of homelessness. I haven't checked the statistics. I didn't get around to it. So that's sort of the backdrop to this discussion. Let me ask Tayo, why do you think this is an important question, and how do you think it affects happiness generally?
I think it's the best I can do is talk about the meaning crisis, and without with the death of God in individuals' life, they don't have a purpose, and just you might as well be homeless and not, what am I driving for if there isn't, if it's all just going to end it, if I'm just a ball of atoms flying through space and I'm going to die and everything just goes away. Like, if there's no grand narrative to live in, then I can see why someone can. But there are also lives that are just tragedy. People have, like, life happens to people in a way that they can become homeless. But for those that are choice homelessness, that due to drugs or whatever that may be, the best I can talk about is the meaning crisis.
Okay, Claire, what have you got to say? Why is this topic important, and possibly is it related to happiness in any way for society?
Obviously, homelessness would make the homeless very unhappy. And your title about whether it's a failure of leadership, about the problem of homelessness, is completely to the point. There is no moral leadership, because people won't say, what the problem is. They're, trying to pretend it doesn't really exist, or, they can look the other way. But we were discussing earlier, Khaled and I, about why, what we would do if we were homeless. And I said, well, if the option of slavery were possible, in order to avoid starving on the streets, we would sell ourselves into slavery, and hopefully, somebody will find our, whatever we're capable of doing useful, and maybe while we are, working in the household or factory or whatever of our master, we would learn some skills and get some contacts, and buy manumit ourselves eventually, to become free people again, were we to lose our homes and our property and everything. So, and
I want
also,
you to sell your idea better, Claire, because we were discussing this on WhatsApp, and you give a really strong argument if people understand what kind of slavery we're talking about. So, do you want to talk about that? Like, do you know this? I think because you're a secular Quranist, you're talking about from an Islamic point of view. I mean, do you know some of the conditions that slaves? I think you do. I think that's what you
I've
know.
read a few books about how Roman slaves were treated.
So forget the Romans. We're talking. I think we're talking. I think you. I assumed you were talking about slavery in an Islamic context, or not? Not really. If it's not, then
I
I
mean,
could
there's
explain it.
humane slavery and inhumane slavery, and I
Sure.
think the Western assumption of slavery is that we'd be picking cotton and being whipped. And I'm saying that the Romans were basically, I mean, they would treat their slaves as, expense, like a washing machine. You wouldn't kick it for no good reason, because you spent some money buying it, and if you kicked it and hurt it and it broke its bones or whatever, you wouldn't have a working slave. So this idea that they were, mostly ill treated, um, particularly if they were domestic slaves, is wrong. I mean, yes, I mean, some of them were sentenced to work to death in tin mines and whatever, but usually, you buy something, you don't want it to, you don't want to throw it away immediately. But this is,
Hmm.
maybe part of the propaganda of the West, because it's only the Americans and the British who presume to abolish slavery. And they have thereby created problems for themselves, because their welfare state is basically a breeding ground for social parasites who will
Hmm.
not be able to work, who come from fathers' homes brought up by their unmarried mothers, who didn't go to a good school, and whom nobody would want to employ anyway.
So I'm going to back up your idea because I think you're not doing your idea justice enough. So I'm going to quote a rough. Maybe I will read the thing. So from Prophet Muhammad, he said, "Your slaves are your brothers, upon whom Allah has given you authority. So if one has one's brethren, if one has one's brethren under one's control." I sometimes feel like paraphrasing these things. Basically, in short, Prophet Muhammad says you should treat your brothers and sisters. You should treat your slaves as brothers and sisters. So give them the same standard of housing, food, and clothes as your carer stroke master has, and you should even help your slaves. So what happened there? Your connection must have gone. So what I was saying, because I think your connection died for a second, something clear,
Yes, it did.
is that the Islamic point of view, which I assumed you were coming from in terms of slavery, is that you work in very humane conditions, much better than a lot of companies nowadays. And apparently, I should have done a lot more research, but I think there's all sorts of indentured slaves or all kinds of slavery at the moment, and it's a very high level at the moment. But this kind of slavery is far better than working at Amazon, for example. You probably, if you're, let's say, your master stroke, I prefer to call it carer, um, is living in a mansion. You get to live in a mansion.
Mhm.
And if he's got really nice food, according to Islam, the slave, so-called slave, has to get the same food and the same clothes. Like literally in the time of Islam, the slaves wore the same clothes as their so-called masters. Now, it's not great to be in a slave situation, so Islam always found ways of making you free your slaves. Like if you were rude to them or anything like that, hit them straight away, you'd have to free them. But while you were a slave, you had it pretty good because you're not even allowed to make them work too hard. So and in the situation where there's a lot of homelessness, that might be a solution. I was actually third on my ranking of solutions, but I thought you don't promote your pretty good ideas well enough. I think you're kind of a bit harsh. But yeah, anyway, that's my. Anyway, do you disagree
can I
with
just
this
comment on
kind
that
of?
really quick?
Yeah, go for it, Taya.
Yeah, I think you did a good job cleaning up the way Claire oppositely presented slavery, but I think even in your attempt to sort of clean up, you're doing a lot of idealizing and saying yes, oh yes, slave wear clothes, the same clothes as their master. Humans are humans, and even if that is the ideal, I'm sure not all Islamic masters treated their slaves the way you're describing. So I think let's bring a little bit more realism into the reality of slavery and the fact that if someone has power over you, human nature takes over, and there are people can behave in inhumane ways towards other people that are under their control. That's not me saying that Islam promotes that, but saying that not everyone lives up to the ideal of the society they live in.
Sure, I agree with that. Claire, do you want to
And
respond to that?
secondly,
Oh, go on, Claire. Taya is still saying something. Go on.
no, Claire, I'll let Claire
Taya,
respond
are
to
you
that.
still saying something? Okay, go
Um,
for it, Claire.
well, I mean, slavery is an institution, which means it's a bargain, and I think Americans should really consider how many white people were also slaves, because those Europeans would not have made the Atlantic crossing if it were not for indentured servitude, because all these peasants from the Irish potato famine, they didn't have their savings to afford to pay for their fare across the Atlantic. They had to make to pledge their labor for I don't know how many years it was once they got to the other side, and work there for I guess not for free exactly, but they had to pledge their labor for a certain number of years before they were allowed to, seek their fortune. So America would not have been founded if
Um,
if
I
indentured
don't,
servitude
I
had not been
don't know.
practiced.
Sorry, Claire, I don't know if you heard a single word of what I said because I don't think you're responding to what I said. But I think what you just said proves the point I was making about the reality of human nature and the fact that even in so
Well,
that's what
there
when I
will
was.
be. I'm certainly
I, was,
not going
I
to
did not bring. I wasn't talking about the transatlantic white people, black slavery. I was speaking in general terms. I wasn't
Yeah,
speaking about.
you're saying that not every master will be kind and to the slaves and wear the same clothes and give
Yeah,
them the same food, but as a slave, maybe you're not really in a position to complain, to your master and say, hey, well, you're not wearing the same clothes as me, and they would know their place and not to complain and be grateful that they still have food in their belly and a roof over their heads instead of starving on the streets, and that will be good enough for them.
Cool. So I'm going to step back. So the only reason I was not intending to go personally
sorry.
as
The second point. Sorry. I let Claire respond to the first point I was making, but I had a second point I
yeah,
wanted to make. I'll be quicker with this one. The second point
yeah.
was can be summed up that I would rather you use the example of Amazon worker and compare with this vision of slavery. I'll rather be in a world where I can be CEO at Amazon. That's plausible than be a slave. So yeah, that's
Sure. Oh, by the way, I think we should clarify, and I'm going to check with Claire her idea of slavery. I call this professional slavery, where you choose to be a slave, like you're homeless, or capitalism isn't working for you for whatever reason, or society generally, and you go, you know what, I'm going to go on to maybe we should pick a better term for it, but let's call it slavery for now, where I'm going to work for somebody, you know, like an au pair sort of thing. You take care of the children and
Have you guys seen Fight Club? I know you love movies,
yeah,
Khalid.
yeah, I
Yeah.
love movies and I love Fight Club. What about it?
Yes, exactly. So what you're describing is the character in Fight Club is like, I'm done being a cog in a machine. I'm just a system. I'm done with capitalism. And you're saying, oh, I've got an option for you. Become a slave. So leave one slavery for another. That's the vision you're selling here.
Sure, there could be an argument. Yeah, yeah. So I'm just to clarify what kind of slavery we're talking about. We're talking about, I would call it professional slavery, where you choose to you work for somebody and you get a roof over your head and all the food and all the other perks. Is that what your idea of slavery was, Claire? Because I just assumed that's what you had in mind.
Yes, yes, because the whole point of slavery is that you're basically working for free. You're working for the benefit of having a roof over your head and food in your belly, right? I mean, that is basically, to avoid starving on the streets. So you might be in such a position that you're prepared to do that, because the alternative would be to starve on the streets. But actually, if you legalize slavery, I mean, obviously, people like, well, nobody wants to be a slave. But you know if this option were possible, and of selling yourself into slavery, you immediately create another class of people, of slaves nobody wants to buy, which is an Old Testament curse in the book of Deuteronomy. Worse than being made a slave is a slave that nobody wants to buy.
Sure. So just to answer Lo Wang's question, is slavery halal? It's permitted, and how can you say, and conditions are created so that people can get out of slavery very easily, and usually it's in a own this in historically in terms of the life of Prophet Muhammad. It was only in situations where the enemy was threatening slavery themselves. So normally Muslims didn't want to create slaves in the first place, but to give a deterrent, you would say, if you are threatening to make us slaves, we have to be as scary as you are trying to be scary, sort of thing. And so therefore we will make you slaves. But even in that case, you have to be very kind to the slaves and, as we said, provide food and all this kind of stuff. And if you're rude to them, hit them or something, immediately they get their freedom, and they can work for their freedom. And if they to get their freedom through work, it has to be a very just way. So it can't be like you earn 1 penny per day or something. It has to be a just way. So that's kind of quickly answering that. But I'm going to quickly rewind, as I said, not rewind or backtrack. I would have not said slavery is the first solution, but sometimes I do think it is a good short-term solution, because what I'm going to say very briefly is the two solutions that I would have offered, which are better than slavery, but maybe they would take longer. Okay, is first of all nationalization of resources, which, according to the Quran, should be used to provide all the basic needs: food, clothing, water, and shelter. And that stops capitalistic slavery, like in places like Amazon or the sweatshops in China, supposedly. I don't know the reality of these things, but like really bad jobs. You do really bad jobs because you don't have any other option. It's a kind of slavery. You're a slave to a boss who basically pays you next to nothing. And so that's one solution. And quickly, another solution before the idea of professional slavery that we're talking about is something called the Zakat, which is a wealth tax. So it's a double kind of thing where this tax is used to help the poor, first of all. And the second thing is if you're really rich and you want to reduce your tax, because it's a wealth tax, it only taxes your surplus income, which is the rich people only, really. The way you can reduce that is to invest your money. And where would you invest it? In the poor. So you're not just giving charity, because sometimes that's a bad thing that weakens people. People become dependent on charity. You're investing in people and say, here's some money. I'm going to invest in you, poor person, in your business, and then they can uplift themselves. So those are my two preferred solutions. But I do like the slavery idea because it's an immediate answer to a problem. So those are some of my thoughts. Claire, what do you think about, to summarize, nationalizing resources and therefore providing the basic needs for human beings so they don't have to depend on, being slaves or something, and investment by rich people in poor people?
Well, yes, that's the whole point of having a free market economy in a way. It's like, well, if you can get to the top just by working hard and having a few good ideas and having the right contacts and whatever, then that would be great. But this free market economy no longer exists for many people because it's choked by red tape and unnecessary regulation and HR and all these sort of parasitic groups and institutions that stop people from making money. Like if you want to sell stuff, on the streets, you have to get some license, certificate, or whatever, and it just makes hard for enterprising small businesses to make it, and gives all the control to big business who now run the world through the WEF,
Okay.
buying our politicians who are in their pocket.
I see your point. Okay. But big businesses, like I think they call it the FTSE 100 or all these kind of things, they don't really last that long as long as we imagine them. They last about a generation, 30 years, and then they collapse on themselves because they become inefficient and lazy. You can see that with Amazon, by the way. Jeff Bezos lost, and apparently what's it called? The shares are tanking and all this kind of stuff on Amazon. So I think we shouldn't be too pessimistic. But I agree. At the moment, we've got a moral problem, and it's going to take a long time to overcome those moral problems. And I do like very practical solutions that poor people shouldn't wait for this idealized world where politicians become not corrupt. So that's why I like this short-term solution. But okay, let me put it this way: did you know that this Zakat? Have you heard of the Zakat wealth tax system before, Claire?
Yes, you every year you give your wealth.
Yeah, and do you know how you can avoid paying it according to Islamic system? Not corruptly, but did you know basically if you have no surplus income because you've invested it, which is something Jeff Bezos does anyway, a lot of billionaires do that, then you don't have any zakat to pay, and you get the benefit of your investments. And if you invest in poor people, win-win for everybody, I suppose.
Oh yes, it would be a kind of tax exemption, like
Yeah.
giving to charity. You don't have to pay, something. I mean, I can't just describe it, but anyway, if you say you give to charity, you don't have to pay that tax, or the charity
Exactly,
doesn't
yeah.
have to pay that tax.
And it's better than just giving to charity. You're investing, which is you're enabling poor people so they don't become dependent. And it's part of this idea of money velocity. So I don't know if you've heard of such a term, but
The velocity of the circulation of money.
Exactly. So it's like blood. Money is like blood in a body. The more it is freely circulating, the more healthy the body is. But if you have the opposite, which is the interest-based system, money gets clogged up in one or two places, and then the rest of the body, or let's say the economic society, dies, shrivels up, and that's what's happening to poor people at the moment, because we're in an interest-based society, which sucks up money into a few hands. So I think it's a really great solution. What do you think? I mean, let's get Tayo. What do you think about this way of enforcing and encouraging the redistribution of wealth so you don't have poor people in the first place, or you give poor people more of a chance. What do you think, Taya?
Okay. Firstly, I think it is the duty of the rich and the duty of the poor to worship God. Um, that's what to start with. For the rich person, it's their duty to help the poor. For the poor person, it's their duty to help the even poorer still. And that's how idealistically, that's how the redistribution of wealth should work. In the agnostic atheist framing, my favorite idealistically way of wealth distribution is communism. But again, we're only speaking to ideals. So I think it's fun. It's easier to talk in ideals and talk about which system would work and how to get rid of poverty. But I think the reality is that poverty is a consequence of the fall of human and our forever struggle to fall away from the ideal that God has set before us. So I think any government that you're putting together where we're trying to get rid of exterminate poverty will look something like a totalitarian system.
Okay, I want to push back on that a little bit, because this is not just ideals and theories, there are practical examples of the things we're talking about. So first of all, communism, we've got loads of examples of how communism has failed and has been really bad and destructive for society. And the basic reason for that is that capitalism, if anybody hates it for whatever for all its failures, is one thing is really good at redistributing wealth to different sources. If you don't have that mechanism within capital that capitalism provides, what happens is you need individuals, you need these bureaucrats who don't know enough about all the millions of products in the market, and they don't know how to distribute it correctly. So that's one thing. And then there's an example of the Zakat system in relatively modern Europe. In between the two world wars, you have Wurgel, which was a town which decided to scrap their currency, provided their own tokens to the community, and said, this is now money. And they said they basically instituted the Zakat system without knowing it, because they heard of some other, what's it called, economist, I can't remember his name, and I'll probably put some reference to it in the document that I provide, right? And basically it forced people, basically it said, if you don't spend your money, whatever surplus money you have, it will be taxed. So basically people just kept spending their money, and it massively increased money velocity and massive increase, and basically solved the huge
Where is this,
fiscal
sorry?
crisis. Wurgel, Worgl. Okay, and they call it the miracle of Wurgel, and the banks didn't like this idea and they shut it down. This is immediately after the Wall Street crash and which had ripple effects all over. So this is in Austria. I should have said kind of more locally. So in Austria, and when they saw this experiment work, other towns wanted to copy it, but the banks shut it down. The big banks shut it down. So they know it works. The big banks know it works practically. So I'm saying there are practical solutions, or no, there is evidence that these solutions work.
For how long?
Well, they were working fantastically until the banks told them they can't work. Basically, it makes sense, just in a practical sense, I mean, a practical way, that if you keep redistributing money and rather than having it tied up in a few hands, then
Okay.
it
I'll try
invigorates
to
the
be quick
economy.
this time and be clearer. I don't think I was as clear last time. So
Yeah.
I think the point I was making is that ideally all systems works perfectly, and like you rightly said, in reality all systems fail. There's always a fail point for every system. Whatever system you implement, it failed. You're saying this one system it failed because it was stopped by an outside force, a failure nonetheless. My point as a Christian, I don't believe that we're going to get a utopia in this dispensation. I don't believe that we're going to get a world where there is no death, no poverty. Revelations 21 talks about the vision of there being no death, no pain, no suffering. But this is after the return of the king. I think the way to instantiate true and just redistribution of wealth is to have a just king ruling the kingdom, and that just king will be the one to make sure and enforce that the just redistribution of wealth. I
So
don't
you want
believe
Charles to be king?
I don't believe any I don't believe any human is capable of being this
Okay, so
just king.
we have to wait for the second coming, and in the
Yes, and
meantime suffer,
yes,
even though we have solutions that are to hand. But you want us to believe that Christ is king and also God, and
any
we have
solution
to do things the way you do in order to.
any solution that's claiming to eradicate poverty will come by through a totalitarian system, will come by killing everyone
Christianity
that
was pretty totalitarian. You couldn't
yes,
deny the Trinity without.
that is to my point. In this world, there is no
Okay,
justice.
well,
In this
the First
dispensation, you're
Amendment
not
is
going to end
supported
poverty.
by a verse in the Quran. There is no compulsion in belief. Truth stands clear from error. And the Americans realized it. That's the basis of their First Amendment. And he wanted them to, well, have a king. Well, I guess they can make Harry their king if they want,
I'm not.
and
No,
I
Claire,
mean,
you
it's
misunderstand.
He,
You
ridiculous.
so
misunderstand. You
he didn't.
misunderstand. You
Yeah.
misunderstand. I am not saying that if we get a king, it's going to be great. I'm saying we need to get a just king, a righteous
Well, we're
king,
not going to
and I don't
get it,
believe
are
any
we?
man is capable of
You
being
want
a
us to
just,
go back
righteous
to
king.
500
Okay, let's just do it one
years
at a time.
to,
One at a time. So
No,
Why
Tayo
are you
it's
so
made
just
his.
bloody
triggered, Claire?
ridiculous that I
Why are
can't
you so
keep
triggered?
quiet. He wants to
Okay, let's
return
have turn.
to
Let's have turn.
absolute bloody monarchy, and we wanted. Are we to treat him as if he were making sense? He believes
I
that
found your
Jesus
trigger
is
point, Claire.
God.
This is fun for me.
Okay, fine,
Yeah,
fine.
good.
Okay, I
Because
think
you enjoy talking nonsense with other people like you. And you're just going to reject all the solutions because you think you're going to heaven, right? You think you're going to heaven because you are
That's not.
Christian, but actually you are idolaters who
Okay. Let
worship
me
an
summarize. Let me
executed
summarize because
blasphemer.
okay. Let
That
me.
I
is the
find your way to
reality
trigger
of
Claire.
Okay.
Go on and let me
Christianity.
do this.
Okay, Claire. I'm just going to summarize what you're saying. Basically, what you're saying is his ideas depend on just belief, no practical solutions.
Nope.
Um,
I'm not.
Belief in
Going
an
to allow you
okay,
absurdity
to
that has been
strong on my idea.
debunked.
Ask me my idea, Khaled.
okay, go on,
Don't summarize
Tayo.
my
So let's
essay.
hear Tayo to say because I'm characterizing, I think you're characterizing it, Claire, as just a bunch of beliefs, but no practical solutions. But what's your rebuttal, Tayo?
My rebuttal is this. Sorry, the troll in me wants to troll Claire so much. I want to. My rebuttal is yes. We should. Everyone should have a king. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying scrap democracy. Every country go to a monarchy. That's not what I'm proposing. Nor am I saying that. Oh, let's do nothing and just watch all the homelessness increase and poverty increase and not do anything practical. That is not what I am saying. What I am saying is any system that's promoting ailing and helping people, I'm for. Any system that's promoting solving poverty will always has to be a totalitarian system, and I'm not for that unless it's held by a just king. That's
You're
why I'm
still
saying.
saying do nothing and believe in rubbish. That's
No,
what you're
I'm saying
saying.
I'm no
That's
no
what you're still saying. That's what people
I'm
like you.
saying help your
That's why.
neighbors.
That's why
Join a church,
Christianity is the religion
join a
of the
community
stupid
church,
people.
help people in real life. Don't come up with a system that will solve
Well,
homeless
how about
poverty.
banning
Help
usury?
real life
How about
people,
banning
help your
That's what
usury?
neighbors,
I was going to come to.
help your
Okay, let's put.
neighbors.
Can I put it? So we've heard your argument, and I think both me and
Bring
Claire want
back
to
the
ask you.
king.
No, this is the question that I was going to ask
Just
you, and now
giggle away
okay,
because he doesn't take anything seriously.
I let the viewers decide, but I do agree with Claire that you're not saying anything sensible, but
Yeah, of course you do.
Claire, but what I so this is a question that Claire just asked, but she used the old term called usury, and I was going to ask this. So, in the past, Christians even persecuted the Jews for using an interest-based economic system because they thought it was against the teachings of Judaism and Christianity. And there are great dangers in interest-based system, but we've been accustomed to it, so we think it's the default system. But just for people who don't know, it enables wars. You can't have wars without interest-based systems because they're too expensive. You have to borrow money to pay for it, and it does a whole bunch of crazy other stuff like causes inflation, whatever. We can talk about the detail of how. So, in short, my question to you, Tayo, is: do you think we should reject interest-based system as Christians of the past used to?
I don't know enough to comment on that. Sorry.
Okay, fine. What do you think, Claire? Do you think Christians and all society should reject usury, as you put it, or interest-based lending? What's your opinion?
Yes, of course, but it would be considered heresy to the bankers and capitalists, and we would be targeted for being extremists. How dare we give up usury?
And by the way, the thing I suggest about the Zakat system is the alternative to usury. So people say, and I've heard this increasingly by some Christian right-wing type people in the US who are saying you need usury because they're trying to say how Islam can't work. You said you can't have, how do businesses get money if they don't have usury or interest-based systems? And Islam's alternative is the Zakat system, which is basically encouraging rich people, and rich people, probably a lot of them made their money using their intellect, encourage them to invest in other people. So hopefully invest wisely. Right now, when banks invest in people, they don't invest really badly because they know even if they give money and the person who gets the money can't pay it back, they're going to get the poor person's house and everything that, it was pinned on. I can't remember the word. Yeah. But it's a win-win situation for banks. They can invest really badly because then they get to rob the poor person who they invested in.
Yeah, they get your house.
They get everything, yeah. So this is an alternative system that Islam provides, which is called the Zakat system. You can look into it. Basically, rich people, to avoid paying this Zakat tax, they have to use the money up. They have to reduce their wealth. And the way they can do that is invest in lots of poor people, which is really enabling for poor people. So,
or the joint venture system.
Sorry, again?
Which is an Islamic commercial system, isn't it?
What was that? I heard, because I don't think it allows both of us to talk. What was that? What system?
The joint ventures. I think Islamic banks promote the idea of if you think this idea is really going to work, then we all put our capital in it and we share the profit.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Exactly. So I call it investment, but you can call it joint venture. Yeah. So there weren't, in the times of the early days of the Muslims, they didn't exactly have banks that I know of, but just well-trusted people who are really good at investing. And they'll say, here's my money. I really trust you. You've done a fantastic job in the past. Can you invest it in the right places? And if your investments work, great. If they fail, okay. That's what an investment is like. So yeah, the joint venture system, if you want to call it that. Cool.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the failure of leadership thing. I think it's a failure of moral leadership because nobody's going to make the point that maybe slavery shouldn't have been abolished, and maybe usury should be abolished because they're scared of the Anglo-Saxon Empire that is built on all these things, on usury and unofficial slavery. Because if it's unofficial, because it still goes on, but underground, people, the parties will be exploited because none of the contracts can be enforced, and which means the parties won't be protected by law.
Okay. I want to try to go on, Tayo. Go on.
Sorry, really quickly on the slavery front. I know that the slavery will be triggering to a lot of people. Some people that are that are watching. So I'll give some kind of context. I'm Nigerian, and there's a form of help that are called like a house girl, house boy, which is usually this is how it goes. Someone from the village gets a job in the city, gets married, and they get someone from back in the village to come and live with them and help them. And if they're a kind uh, host, they'll help the girl to school and treat them to a point where they can leave their house and have their own. But others can just keep them forever in the house and make them the maid of the house for perpetuality. So that's a level of slavery that I think Claire is invoking. But Claire could also be talking about extreme slavery. I don't know. Claire's a secular Quranist.
Actually, I do have a system of slavery that would avoid all these abuses. My idea would be that the government would be the one running the system. They would have a department of work, pensions, and manumissions, and basically the government would be hiring out slaves to hirers of slaves and check on them to see if they're working properly, and there would be an account. So when when the hirer of the slave pays enough, and there is enough money, then the slave is automatically freed. So that's how it would work, and there would be slave visitors to check that the slave is not being abused and is working properly. So
very
it would
briefly,
be regulated.
cool. And so, very briefly, what if the slave loves it so much? They're living in a house with a billionaire. They get billionaire food, billionaire clothes,
They can
and
stay.
they can stay. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, and the account would keep building, because it would be, it would be actually money, like the slave has manumitted himself, but I mean, they can still get free food and lodging, and there would be all that. And anytime the slave can just manumit himself, but he chooses to stay with the master.
Cool. So if those were the rules, which are pretty crazy rules, but they're Islamic rules, which is the slave has to have the same clothes as the master, the same food as the master, whatever, same lodging, all that kind of stuff. Tayo, in that scenario, if it was, monitored by the government, what do you think about this system as a short-term solution? I don't think it's the best solution, but I think
Can
it's
I?
a short-term solution.
A lot of what Claire proposes and what you by proxy propose sound similar to me to all of the wild left globalist futurist people proposing in terms of having everyone under supervision of AI and trusting the AI god to sort of dictate how things to work. And who's going to control the AI? The government. Like the government will do best. Christianity. So the story of Christ is that story of systems and person. And Christ talks about it's the art of the individual and it's changing, not the system. That's what the gospel is. The gospel is that even if the system isn't changing or looks impossible to change, if the individual person in their heart changes their heart towards God and starts living for God, by that the system changes. And so yes, what you propose sounds good if, for example, the person in charge of the government has their heart towards God, then yes, I would presume that yes, that person would be kind enough to organize the system in a way that supports it. But the reality is, people are not often like that, and yeah, that's my response to that.
No, okay. So I like to try to support people in their arguments. And so I agree that you have to be a moral person for this system to work because every system can be abused. So I agree with that. And I do support people becoming more godly because that makes people, like Claire was saying, becoming more self-aware and thinking, I can't get away with abusing a slave because even if I get away with it in this world because nobody can see me when I'm abusing the slave, God's watching and I'll have to pay for it afterwards. So I agree with that in that sense.
Can I just reframe that a little bit? Can I just
Yeah, go
reframe
on.
that? That's your framing of that, and you're helping me to give language to what I'm trying to say, which is not so much that a person that's worried that if I don't do the right thing in this life, God will punish me. It's more a person that trying to become more like God in this world, and recognizing that the God is a loving to the poor and the suffering and the least and to everyone, and trying his best to do that as best they can. Not because they're hoping to get some big reward at the end of it, but because they love God so much that they know that it's good, it's true, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, so I agree with that. Yeah, because that's how God describes himself in the Quran. Like the most repeated ways, which is in the beginning of every chapter. He says he gives the most, and he encourages people who use their inner abilities, and he rewards them for using their inner abilities. So yeah, essentially, you should be like the kind God who created you. That's great. The reason why me and Claire was saying you were just saying things based on faith rather than practical argument. Well, I don't want to say on behalf of Claire, but first of all, practically, we can see you might disagree with me, but people are leaving Christianity because it doesn't make sense, because it teaches you things like the Trinity, 3 = 1, and stuff like that. But not only
There we
that, if you look at the look at
come
look
up
at
to the truth.
if you look at like Christianity or Judaism's teachings on how to treat slaves, it says you can kill a slave as long as it takes longer than 2 days to kill them. So I don't know, any thoughts about that?
Well,
Any thoughts of
that's terrible. Well, torture them
Yeah.
for 3 days and then it's
Mm,
okay. But if you kill them instantly, it's not. Um,
mm.
that it seems to be against the idea of humane killing. Who wants to be killed over 3 days?
So Tayo, any sort of thoughts? I mean, I think that's why people are not taking.
virus?
Me and Claire couldn't take it too seriously because of that background. But anyway, go on. What's your response?
I'm not surprised that you and Claire aren't taking what I say seriously, or Christianity seriously, because like you say, your framing of Christianity is it's dying, it's dead, it's not even a threat. It's not even a threat. Add its day and it's dying, and we don't have to worry about Christianity. Whereas I'm like, okay, cool. Think that they also thought Jesus was dead, and then 3 days later up he was. So it's built into my faith that we're dying faith. So from that, if you're seeing Christianity as dying and people are living Christianity, like again, like I said, you keep pointing to England, and I'm like, okay, the world is bigger than England or even the West, and uh, sure, and also the Christianity isn't a religion that, unlike Islam, that wants global domination for it to be successful. That's not what Christianity is built upon, and yeah, so I understand why what I say sounds foreign to you, because we're seeing things from two different worldview, which I do appreciate you sharing your platform for me to share my worldview, because that's generous of you. But I understand that I sound like a crazy guy to you guys.
Cool. I mean, let the viewers decide, and we can decide as well. But Claire, do you want to any thoughts, and you want to express yourself?
Well, on the subject of Christianity, I think that what they do is they say yes and no at the same time, which is what really drives everybody crazy. We believe in God.
It's
We
not
know
yes
we're
and
not
no,
supposed.
it's now and not yet.
Well,
That's what
I
really
don't
drives
know what
people
that
crazy.
means.
now and not yet. Well, I
Exactly.
mean that contradicts itself. I mean you're doing this thing again, and I know it's important to you. Your Christian identity is
Can I can
important
I
to
can
you.
I point out ways in which both of you do the now and not yet?
I'll be amazed to hear justification, but I think Claire would be just rolling her eyes. Probably I would be as well. But go on, try to
All right.
explain
No,
what
no, I'm
now
not.
and
I'm not
not
I'm
even.
yet
looking
means.
for my
I'm not gonna
eyes
try.
on the floor because they've rolled right
I'm
out
not.
of their
I'm not
sockets.
even going to try, because you're not even open to it.
Okay.
You're basically saying believe in Jesus and you will enjoy
That's
the
not what I'm saying.
afterlife.
Claire. Don't straw man me. That's not what I'm saying. Whilst I'm on screen, I would every time you try to straw man me, I will interrupt you to say that's not what I'm saying.
Okay, so what are you saying? And then you take half an hour or even longer to say what it is, and then we'll be none the wiser because that is
I will.
the discourse of
Okay,
Christianity.
in 30 seconds, can you explain like why now and your now but not yet terminology? What does that mean?
The now and not yet means the world is both beautiful and chaotic. you can see both the beauty in the world and also the despair of the world. That's what it means.
Okay, cool. And I will explain that from an Islamic point of view, it teaches if you have fear of God, then you will have paradise in this world and the next. There's a verse of the Quran that basically alludes to that. So basically, people think religion is make your life miserable in this life so you can be happy in the next life. Throughout this show I've been talking about, in all my shows, I talk about how Islam gives you happiness in this life as well. So, and it solves this world's problems as well. So you don't have to wait, or you don't have to wait for the not yet, I think, as you're putting it. So we've only got 2 minutes left. Should we kind of do some roundup from different perspectives of the answer to the question, is homeless a failure of leadership and morality? Claire, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. Homelessness is indeed a failure of moral leadership because no one, not even Jews and Muslims, will make the case that slavery was not, which would solve the problem of homelessness, was not banned in either the Quran or the Bible. So if you're going by the way liberals think, what is not forbidden is allowed. But they're too afraid to even make these arguments because they're afraid of the might of the Anglo-Saxon Empire crushing them for daring to speak out. And the Anglo-Saxon Empire was created by Christianity, not following the rules of warfare, of governance, and they enjoyed a brief moment of success, and now they're failing under the weight of its own contradictions. And Christianity is the perfect epitome of this, because on the one hand, these Christians are supposed to know about the 10 Commandments forbidding idolatry, and they are the worst practitioners of idolatry, and nobody will point this out. And it is indeed a failure of leadership.
Tayo, why don't you give your roundup views on this, answering the question, is homelessness a failure of leadership and morality?
What I've learned from the question is that Islam's answer is for slavery is for you to, if you're not happy, you can always become a slave, which would be a straw man of what you guys have been saying, like the way Claire has been straw manning everything I've been saying, but I'm not going to do that. Really what I've learned is that there are Islamic systems in place that promise a utopian society where there is no homelessness, no poverty, no this. And when I look around in the world, that's not the case. There is nowhere in the world where this utopia actually exists. And yes, that's
Okay,
all I've
cool.
got to
So
say.
we shouldn't even try.
Sure.
You're
So
saying we shouldn't even try.
and so my answer, you know what?
I didn't say that. Let's stop putting words in my mouth. I did not say we should not try. Just say
How are we going to
doesn't
try? How
exist
are we
there.
going to try, Teo?
Yeah, God save the king.
We're trying
God
to
save
end
the king. God save the king.
Okay, clear. So anyway, so we're trying to wind up here, not wind people up, but wind up the conversation. And you know what? In my summary is besides the 3 solutions that one I took from Claire, I thought it was genius, and the slavery thing, because I've never heard anybody. Yeah, I thought just have to rebrand it somehow. But that's a fantastic solution. But the world we live in has enough for everybody. So if it was fairly distributed through nationalization of all the resources we had, we'd easily be able to provide all the basic needs of people. Okay, and I don't think that's too utopian. But besides that, the one thing I haven't said is that if you come to Jordan, you'll see that you don't have homelessness or next to no homelessness. And the reason is because of the Islamic ideals of family, people just stick to families, and you see a lot of homeless people. You wonder, where are their parents? Where are their brothers and sisters? How comes they aren't with that particular household, within their family household? And that's because families broken down. So say again?
More time on family, but this was fun. God save the king.
Yes. So I think there are immediate solutions, and we should wonder where are the family of these homeless people? Nobody's born not in a family. They're not born without family.
Yep.
And so that's a one other solution that I didn't actually bring up. So anyway, thank you very much. Fantastic ideas. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much,
Appreciate it.
Alan.
All right.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
All right. It was fun, definitely. All right. Bye.
Bye.